As everyone in this room knows, Senator Cruz is the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, and for most of us here in the room, that's a pretty darn important position when we talk about communications law and policy, and that's all I'll say about now. Even with Senator Cruz, I'm going to say the same thing I've said all along. You've got his bio in the brochure, the full bio, and I'm going to refer you to that. And of course, the website, I'll just say Senator Cruz was elected, I love these statistics, 34th senator from Texas in 2012, reelected in 2018, and just last year served in a number of other public positions. I'm just going to note one because this is issue. We all heard FTC Chair Andrew Ferguson speak this morning, and boy, he gave us a lot of good information about his priorities here at the FTC, but Senator Cruz also spent time early on in his public career at the FTC. He was the director of, he just told Office of Planning and Policy, or something like that. So with that, please join me in welcoming Senator Ted Cruz.
Well, thank you, Randy. Good morning. It is great to be with you. You, of course, said I wouldn't mind if folks stayed up here. It depends if they heckle me or throw things at me. With Robert in particular, that's a risk. I will note he's got a pretty good jump shot, but I'm feeling pretty happy about it watching that bandage. I hope you have a good story for how that happened.
I do, but I'm off the court for about 6 weeks. I'm sorry.
So we play every week. We play old guys against young guys, and Robert and I are very firmly in the old guy camp. So injuries are part of the game. The old guys do win about 90% of the time. Well, good morning. It is great to be with you. It is an exciting time right now. Adam Smith believed the best check on any industry is the power of consumers. When markets work, bad ideas fail. Good ideas succeed, and all benefit. I appreciate the Free State Foundation carrying forth that spirit and your longtime leadership in free market thought applied to communications law and policy. FSF's work is particularly relevant to the Senate Commerce Committee. With jurisdiction over 40% of the U.S. economy, including telecommunications and technology, the Commerce Committee sits at the nexus of many of America's most critical industries. I'm grateful to serve as the very first Texan ever as the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. My number one priority in this role remains the same as it has been for the entire 13 years I've served in the Senate. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Pursuing policies that will create jobs and pursue economic growth. We're just 3 months into the new Congress, and I can tell you profound shifts are underway. We are working hard to get the country back on track. In a short period of time, we've been able to accomplish a number of things that last year Democrats stood in the way of. Earlier this month, the Senate unanimously passed the Coast Guard Authorization Act, which will enhance the capabilities of the Coast Guard to protect our borders, will facilitate maritime commerce, unleash American energy, bolster deterrence efforts, and improve support for Coast Guard personnel and their families. Back in January, as one of my very first actions as the chairman of the committee, I reintroduced the bipartisan, bicameral Take It Down Act that I authored along with Democrat Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. The Senate has unanimously passed our bill, and just a few weeks ago, At an event on Capitol Hill, First Lady Melania Trump came to the Capitol to urge the House to take up and pass the Take It Down Act. And then the President at the State of the Union address likewise urged the House to do so. I'm confident we will pass that bill into law. Now, what does the Take It Down Act concern? It concerns a growing pattern we're seeing of non-consensual intimate images, both real images, images that are taken, say, two people in a romantic relationship, take pictures or a video, and then the relationship grows sour. And somebody unhappy posts those images, posts those videos, so-called revenge porn. That is a grotesque violation of privacy, a grotesque violation of your rights. Nobody has the right to do that to somebody else. And with technology, we're seeing a new iteration of that. We're seeing AI being used to create deep fakes that are imperceptible, that appear to be to anyone looking at it as if they're real. At the State of the Union address, sitting next to the First Lady, was Elliston Berry. Elliston's a Texan. She's a 15-year-old girl from Aledo, Texas, North Texas by Fort Worth. And Elliston, when she was 14, she was a freshman in high school. And she woke up one morning and discovered that a classmate of hers had taken an innocent picture from social media, had used an AI app to create deep fakes to make it appear that they were naked pictures, and then had sent those naked pictures to every one of her classmates. Now listen, all of us remember how hard it is to be a teenager. But that morning she woke up in tears as all of her classmates thought they were looking at naked pictures of her. The Take It Down Act makes the posting of non-consensual intimate images a federal crime, whether real or deep fake. And one of the reasons the bill is needed is many of the state laws don't address deep fakes. And so that fell in a hole in the legal coverage. Not only that, however, the Take It Down Act also puts a legal obligation on tech platforms to remove the content when notified. You know, the way I found out about this issue is actually interesting. Elliston is a constituent. She's a Texan. And she called my office as her senator and said, hey, this happened to me. Her mother called, said, this happened to my daughter. Can you help us? And my office forwarded her concern to me. We looked at it and said, this is terrible. Let's draft legislation to address it. Several months later, when I was introducing that legislation, Elliston came up. Her mother, Anna, came up. I was meeting them in my office for the first time. And I asked in the course of the conversation, I said, well, what happened to the pictures? And they said, they're still up. Her mom said maddeningly, she had called Snapchat over and over again. She'd emailed them over and over again and had gotten no response whatsoever, just a stiff arm. I turned to my team, I said, that's ridiculous. I said, I want you to get the CEO of Snapchat on the phone today. I want those pictures taken down today. Within 2 hours, they pulled the pictures off. Now, it should not take a sitting United States senator having to make a phone call to make that happen. And so what the Take It Down Act does is it puts into law a right to have the content removed. And this is, for all the law geeks in the room, you'll actually appreciate how we did this. We borrowed the mechanism from the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So right now, if you tweet out a song from The Lion King, it'll be pulled down within hours because you can't tweet out copyrighted materials. We use the exact same notice and takedown provisions. Every tech platform has mechanisms in place to remove that content, and we applied the same mechanism to non-consensual intimate images so that now if you or your daughter or your wife, if this happens, and over 90% of the victims are women or teenage girls, if those pictures are up there, you have a legal right to take it down. And I'll tell you, I'm very confident it helps when the First Lady decides she wants to champion the issue. And I will tell you, we had a round table with this number of victims telling their stories, including Elliston, Steve Scalise, the majority leader, was coming, and Mike Johnson asked at the last minute, he said, "Hey, do you mind if I come?" And I said, "Mr. Speaker, you have a standing invitation to crash any event we do." And so he pulled up a chair, and I will say, when the First Lady asked, will the House take this up, and passed it, and the Speaker and Majority Leader both committed, yes, we will do so. I have a high confidence that I'm going to be standing in the Oval Office along with Elliston, along with Francesca Monti, another victim in New Jersey who had the same thing happen, and we're going to get this signed into law. There are other bills. We've passed nearly 30 bills out of the committee so far in the first 3 months, including the Routers Act to improve security and reliability of modems and routers, the Informing Consumers About Smart Devices, or as I like to call it, the Spy Fridge bill. A lot of people don't realize their refrigerator may be recording them or videoing them, and you may not want that late night food run recorded for all time. The number one priority on the committee, however, is spectrum. Why is that? Because my top priority is jobs, and there are very few policies in the Commerce Committee that can affect jobs more than spectrum. My Spectrum Pipeline Act directs the federal government to make available to the private sector 600 megahertz of spectrum. As we know, FCC spectrum auctions generate tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue for the federal government. But the real value of a spectrum auction is not just the dollars that come in to the taxpayers. The real value is the private sector investment, the tens of billions, the hundreds of billions of dollars that will be invested in developing that spectrum, the thousands of jobs that will come with it. And in particular, we're in a race with China. We're in a race with China on just about everything. But we need to beat China to 6G. We also need to beat China on AI. And I'll tell you, the Commerce Committee, we are acutely focused on winning the race for 6G and for AI, and on America leading the world. You know, I'll mention in the world of AI, last year, I wrote an op-ed with my good friend Phil Graham, my favorite former senator. And Phil and I wrote an op-ed in the Journal that we did something that might surprise you. We praised a Democrat president. We praised Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was president at the dawn of the internet, and Clinton at the time signed an executive order memorializing a light touch regulatory approach to the internet. At the same time, Europe adopted a very different approach. They adopted a heavy-handed prior approval regulatory approach. And the consequences were massive. A stat we cite in the op-ed is really striking. In 1993, the American economy and the European economy were virtually identical in size. Today, the American economy is 50% larger than Europe. 50% in 35 years. And the driver of that is two things. It's tech and the shale revolution. That's it. That's 100% of the difference. Our economy is 50% larger because we didn't screw up the internet and we didn't screw up energy. Now with AI, I actually think AI was one of the sleeper issues of this last election. Because the prior administration, the Biden administration, had signed an executive order, an AIEO, or as I like to call it, an AIEIO, that embodied the European-style prior approval regulatory approach, putting the federal government in charge of innovation, having to go to Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and ask, "Mother, may I," before we innovate. That's an approach that I'm convinced would have made certain America loses the race to AI. I'm very glad one of the first things President Trump did when he came into office is revoke the Biden AI executive order. That was the right thing to do. We need innovation led by America, and when it comes to 6G, we need innovation led by America. And I'll tell you, on spectrum, I am fighting hard for spectrum to be part of the reconciliation bill that Congress is taking up, that we're going to use to secure the border, that we're going to use to rebuild the military, that we're going to use to unleash American energy, and that we're going to use to extend the 2017 tax cuts and make them bigger and bolder. It's a big pay for in that bill. You got to pay for a whole lot, and spectrum auction is a big, big pay for. And it's profoundly important. As y'all know, DOD historically has resisted giving up spectrum. But I think we're going to get this done, and that is a major priority. Now, there's a lot more going on. There's a lot of interest in what's going to happen on internet connectivity under President Trump. The 2021 infrastructure law's signature internet access program, BEAD, to date has been a spectacular failure. After 3 years and $42 billion, not a single home in America has been connected. Look, I got to say, even for Kamala Harris, that's impressive. Like by accident, she didn't even connect George Soros' house? Zero. That says a lot. Now, Commerce Secretary Lutnick has said he wants to conduct a rigorous review of the BEAD program. I'm glad of it. I think Secretary Lutnick is doing a terrific job. I'm working very closely with him. My hope is he removes all of the Biden-era extraneous regulations, including labor requirements, favoring government-owned networks, extreme tech bias of fiber over satellites and fixed wireless, rate regulation, climate change. By the way, have you noticed the radicals who think climate change is an existential threat to the world are right now firebombing Tesla dealerships? I got to say, my brain is not quite nimble enough to understand why we're all going to die, and so the answer is we must light on fire electric cars in order to prevent that. I will say also, as ranking member, before we had a Senate majority, I conducted rigorous oversight of the BEAD program. And I would highly recommend, if anyone here hasn't read it, the red light report that I put out on the BEAD program, which highlights waste, fraud, and abuse, including identifying unserved locations. One of my favorite unserved locations was the Washington, D.C. Zoo. Because, you know, pandas got to play Candy Crush. I believe that Secretary Lutnick and Ariel Roth, and Ariel is my telecom top staffer. She is terrific. She's going to do a great job at NTIA. The two of them together are going to do a fantastic job. One other area I want to mention is kids online. So we talked about the Take It Down Act. And the Take It Down Act actually illustrates what I think we should do regarding AI generally, which is we don't need some comprehensive octopus regulatory approach to AI that stifles innovation, but are new rules or new laws going to be needed to address AI? Sure, with any technology. We have speed limits on cars. That wasn't much of a problem with horses and buggies. Technology takes new laws and new regulations, but I believe those laws and regulations should be focused to specific, discernible, identifiable problems, rather than just empowering government bureaucrats to decree whatever they will. Another area online is protecting kids online. And I got to say, as the father of two teenage girls, there are few things more terrifying than wondering what your kids are encountering online. I think about when we were kids. We didn't deal with this. You're inviting, through this stupid hunk of metal that we give our children, a portal to every predator on earth, every platform pushing garbage to our kids. Pushing content, pushing harmful content. You look at teenage girls that get pushed body image shaming, that get pushed suicidal ideation, that get pushed self-harm. you look at the content that is going to our kids. So I've joined with Brian Schatz, Democrat of Hawaii, in COSMA, the Kids Off Social Media Act. COSMA does a couple of things. Number one, it prohibits children under 13 from accessing social media. There's no reason on earth an 8-year-old needs to be on Instagram. Young kids ought to be playing in the backyard and not stuck to their damn phones. There'll be plenty of time for that when they're teenagers. COSMA also prohibits big tech from using algorithms on kids under 17, from boosting content to algorithms, because much of the harmful content that is targeted at our kids gets sent to our kids because it is addictive and it brings them down a dangerous path of self-harm. Also included in COSMA is another bill I've drafted called the Eyes on the Board bill. The Eyes on the Board bill is very simple. It says that any school receiving federal funds, which would be pretty much all of them, has to block social media on campus. That if you're in math class, you ought to have your eyes on the board and be listening to algebra rather than posting your immediate thoughts for the rest of the world. This is a bill COSMA has passed out of the Senate Commerce Committee. I believe we're going to move it on the Senate floor and get it passed into law. And I will say a final bill that has passed out of the committee, and I think we're going to get passed into law, is the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. Now, what's the origins of that? The origins are a couple of years ago, 8 big car manufacturers announced in concert, in unison, that they were all removing AM radio from all their new cars and trucks. Now, I believe that was a terrible development. It's a terrible development on many, many fronts. It's a terrible development because AM radio has very low barriers to entry. So there's much greater diversity when it comes to broadcasting on AM radio. There are incredible numbers of African-American-owned AM radio stations, Hispanic-owned AM radio station, women-owned AM radio stations. The barriers, if you have a view to get out and communicate, the barriers to entry are much, much lower on AM radio. Not only that, rural America relies disproportionately on AM radio. If you're a farmer in West Texas, AM radio may be the only thing you can get. To get the crop report or the weather report or to get sports or to get news, you're relying on AM radio. Not only that, in a time of disaster, AM radio has proven the most reliable form for informing people how to get out of harm's way. Other media tend to go down far more quickly, whereas AM radio is quite resilient. And I'll tell you, for me, the simple reality is AM radio has been an oasis of conservative talk. Without AM radio, there would be no Rush Limbaugh. And a lot of my colleagues on the Democrat side of the aisle would love a world where there had been no Rush Limbaugh. There'd be no Sean Hannity. There'd be no Mark Levin. There'd be no Glenn Beck. AM radio has proven to be an oasis for free speech. Well, when it came to AM radio, Ed Markey had a bill, the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. I looked at it and said, hey, I agree with that bill. Let's join together. Now, I'll tell you, Ed Markey may be the most liberal member of the United States Senate. I'm the most conservative member of the United States Senate. When the two of us joined together, it may have been a sign of the apocalypse. Like Bill Murray in Ghostbusters, cats and dogs living together. The end of the world. The day after Ed Markey and I dropped the bill, Ford Motor Company publicly announced it was reversing its decision. And it was going to include AM radio on new cars and trucks. They did so immediately when we filed the bill. I think they looked at the math and said, okay, if we got to get to the left of Markey or to the right of Cruz, there ain't space there for anybody. We passed it out of committee. We had passed it out of committee in the previous Congress. Unfortunately, Chuck Schumer did not prioritize this issue, so he would not give it floor time. I have a high level of confidence John Thune will give it floor time. I've discussed it with him multiple times. I think we'll put it on the floor. If and when we put it on the floor, it will get more than 90 votes. It may get more than 95 votes. There are only a handful of no's. And I think we're going to get this passed and signed into law. I think each of these are examples where there is a role for laws. There is a role for regulations that are directed at specific problems. But at the same time, we need to be unleashing innovation and investment and jobs. And I got to tell you, I'm really proud to be part of what's going on. Listen, it's an exciting time. I don't know about you, but I wake up every morning, grab my phone, and I'm like, what the hell do they do today? And it is embodying, this new administration, 64 days into it, is embodying the Silicon Valley ethos of move fast and break things. By the way, I'll put you all on a Signal chat later today. All right, that was a cheap shot, but you got to have some fun on that. But it is exciting. I'm going to say a final thing that's not actually topical, but it's something y'all may be interested in. So every week I do a podcast. It's called Verdict with Ted Cruz. I do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We've got about 1 million unique listeners. I mention that in particular because last week I sat down for more than an hour and did a one-on-one interview with Elon Musk. And Elon is now a Texan. He's become a good friend. I know Elon well. And that was about as fun as anything I've done. Elon is a fascinating guy. He's absolutely brilliant. Look, I've been blessed, all of us have been blessed to know some smart people in life. If you assume intelligence is distributed on a bell curve, somebody's got to be at the bleeding edge of that bell curve, and his name is Elon. And he doesn't just think outside the box, he doesn't know there is a box. And so I would encourage you, you can watch it on YouTube or download the podcast, but the discussion with Elon, I talk a lot about Doge. You hear all sorts of cataclysmic thing. It is terrible that we're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. It is terrible that we're no longer funding transgender sex surgeries in Guatemala. It is terrible that we're not paying for Sesame Street in Iraq anymore. It is terrible that we stopped $2 billion to a nonprofit that was partially being run by Stacey Abrams. Look, it's stunning the abuse that's being uncovered, and we talk about that at length, but we also talk about the origins of Tesla, of SpaceX. You know, one of the things Elon says in the interview, he says, I think I may know more about manufacturing than any person who has ever lived. And I got to say, when he said it, that's a startling statement. That is an audacious statement. And then when I paused and thought about it, I thought, well, this is not entirely crazy. The man is simultaneously the CEO of Tesla, the CEO of SpaceX, the CEO of the Boring Company, the CEO of Starlink, the CEO of Neuralink, the CEO of X, and running Doge. I asked him, how much do you sleep? His answer was 6 hours a night. But it was fascinating, and I'll give you one tiny vignette and then wrap. I asked him, all right, you start SpaceX. How do you do that? How do you wake up one day and say, I'm going to start me a rocket company? What does one do to start that? And he said, well, at first I wanted to start an effort just to build public support for NASA to go to Mars. And he said, I started doing that, and then I realized NASA's never going to go to Mars. If we're relying on NASA, it ain't ever going to happen. So then he said his next idea, Randy, this is wild. He said he wanted to buy Russian ICBMs that are being decommissioned because of the SALT treaty. And so he went to Russia. I'm like, all right, how do you do that? How do you go to Russia and say, I want to buy me some ICBMs? And he's like, I went over there, negotiated with the government. And he said, you only need one other stage to an ICBM to actually go all the way to Mars. And he said he was negotiating with the Russian government, and first it was $2 million for an ICBM, then it was 4, then it was 8, then it was 12 million. At 12 million, he said, all right, I'm out. These guys are not serious, and they're just taking advantage of us. And it was as a result of that, because they wouldn't sell them ICBMs, he said, all right, we'll make our own spaceships. And that was SpaceX. And now they're building them down in Boca Chica, Texas, on the southern tip of Texas. That's the kind of innovation we need more of. That's the kind of innovation y'all are doing, and that's the kind of innovation I am fighting to create a legal and regulatory and tax environment that encourages more innovation, more jobs, more prosperity, more productivity. And I appreciate the good work all y'all are doing. Thank you.
Well, I've got a couple of basketball buddies here that we didn't know about. That's good. Senator Cruz, I just want to thank you again, obviously, for being here and for delivering such an important address. But aside from that, we want to thank you for the important work you're doing. It matters a lot to those of us in the room, but of course, more broadly, it matters so much to American consumers and American citizens. It's really important, and we're grateful for your leadership, and we wish you well, and we want to be as helpful as we can. So thanks again. Thanks again.
Thank you.